And it's interesting that zakar is also related to being male. You know, male animals mark, or zakar, territory. Now God is about to act by marking his covenant on the territory that he gave to the children of Israel. How will God mark his covenant onto the territory? And what else will God mark? Let's answer the second one first. God is going to mark his people. Do you remember this from the book of Revelation? God marking or sealing his people. Those two are very related. And that is what zakar, remembrance, means. To mark. So God is marking his people. But there's more about this. And I'm going to tell you how God will mark, remember, or zakar, his territory that is part of his covenant. This is from the Theological Dictionary of the Old Testament, Volume 7, and it has to do with cereal offerings. It says, the incense is part of the zakara and is burned on the altar as rea nehoah. Reference to this incense, this particular zakara, can be found in Leviticus 2, verse 2, and in verse 16, and Leviticus 6, verse 8. Azkara is zakar with an aleph on both ends. Now that azkara is incense. It's the kind of incense that's burned on the altar of incense. You see, incense marks the territory. And incense is the zakar, the reminder. So now we're back again to the English word remember. And so every time that the priests were in the tabernacle or the temple burning incense, that was just another way that God was marking his territory, or remembering zakar, his territory. So again, when we think that God doesn't hear our prayers and our groanings, he may actually be in the process of zakar, marking and getting set to come to our rescue because of our azkara, or incense. In Psalm 141:2 it says, "Let my prayer be set forth before you as incense," azkara, that's the remembrance, "and the lifting up of my hands as the evening service." And here is the comparison of Leviticus 2:2, because incense is also ketoret. And so we want to make sure that we're comparing the two types of incense together, because there is a memorial incense, and that's the zakar, and then there is also the incense which is ketoret. But let's read, we just read Psalms, now let's read Leviticus 2:2. "And he shall bring it to Aaron's sons the priest, and he shall take thereout his handful of the flour and of the oil thereof with all the frankincense thereof, and the priest shall burn the memorial, the zakar of it upon the altar, to be an offering made by fire of a sweet savor." Now the incense of ketoret is a sweet savor. You can go and check that out. Unto the Lord. So therefore, our prayers are incense to the Lord. And that is how God will mark his territory that is part of his covenant. So remembering and being remembered is a two-way street. Okay, now going to verse 6. "Wherefore say to the children of Israel, I am the Lord. Now, this will be the first time that the children of Israel have heard the Yod He Vav He as well. See, Moses heard it just a little bit ago. Now he's going to go and say that word that we translate as capital Lord. He's going to go say that word to them. He's going to go say, I have heard from Yehovah, and he's going to rescue you. That'll be their first experience with it. And I will bring you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians, and I will rid you out of their bondage, and I will redeem you with a stretched out arm and with great judgments. And I will take you to me for a people, and I will be a God to you, and you shall know that I am the Lord your God, which brings you out from under the burdens of the Egyptians. And I will bring you into the land concerning the which I swore to give it to Abraham, to Isaac, and to Jacob, and I will give it to you for a heritage. I am the Lord. And Moses spoke so unto the children of Israel, but they hearkened not unto Moses, for anguish of spirit and for cruel bondage. You know, at this point, they had just reached such a point of despair that they didn't care. Likely, they didn't care that they didn't care either. You know, depression and despair are horrible things to go through, and I imagine that this is what they were suffering with. And so when he brought this good word, they were like, oh, what's the point? And kind of, I can understand that. Under that kind of oppression, that's what we get is depression. You know, oppression leads to depression. And now in verse 10, and the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, Go in, speak to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, that he let the children of Israel go out of his land. Now, I want to point out to you that, I didn't go over this last week because I intended to do it here. This Pharaoh here in this Torah portion is a different Pharaoh than we started out with in Shemot. And he died, that other Pharaoh died in the second chapter, verse 23. But this current Pharaoh is still a Hyksos. Egyptian history is just riddled with murders of pharaohs, and how that when they were murdered, their station, their throne, would be claimed by underlings. Well, no one has yet definitively identified who the pharaoh was during this Exodus. And the fact that the Hyksos arose so suddenly and then disappeared just as suddenly, but this time he wasn't fighting just Jacob, who had, yes, the help and strength of the Lord. He's fighting directly with God himself. When we get to verse 11, Moshe starts telling the family genealogy to Pharaoh. Why? Well, it's because Moshe is reminding Pharaoh about the Hebrew family history that Pharaoh already knows, right? Especially if Pharaoh is an Edomite. Now, can't you feel the undercurrent between these two guys from two different branches of the same family?